I think we're good.
All right, well, welcome. Hello. Thanks for signing up and being a part of this. I am very excited. I have been a monster fan all of my life. And so we're going to look at the history of monster movies. We're going to look at the history of why we love these things, why we still love these things, why even though you should have outgrown Godzilla, you do not. These are things that are part of who we are, part of who we grow up being. And I realized just this past week watching Godzilla versus Kong that all of that's still alive in me. I'm still the 10-year-old kid who was taken by his parents to see King Kong in about 1973. And it was a transformative moment for me. I knew then that this is the kind of thing I would always want to do, is go to see big giant monsters on the screen. And so we're going to look at the history of that, because the history of that is a history not just of movies and of science fiction, but it's also a history of technology, of how you come to do these kind of things. Sometimes we get irritated at all the elaborate special effects. You hear this sometimes. People will say, there's too many special effects. They spend billions of dollars on special effects, $1.50 on the script, and all you're getting is a bunch of fancy stuff. But the truth is, film has always been experimental. It's always been about how you go and do new things. I mean, one of the very first films ever made was 45 seconds long, and it was a train coming into a station. But it was a train, the camera was on the tracks, and the train came in straight towards you. And so right from the beginning, films weren't just about showing what's out there in real life. They were about showing something from an angle, from a direction you don't usually see things. It is said that the very first special effect was by George Melies all the way back in 1895. He was one of the very first filmmakers, and he did short little 5 and 10 minute films. And he was shooting a picture of the main street, one of the main streets there in Paris. And so the camera was running, and you cranked them in those days. And he stopped it because he wanted to adjust one of the legs. And while he was doing that, a row of carts that he had been filming, someone came up and pulled one of the carts out and pulled it out of the way. So Melies starts his camera back up and cranks it away. And he discovers later on, when he looks at it, that he's watching this footage of the street with the carts, and suddenly one of the carts disappears. And he saw, oh, I know what happened. Someone took that away when I paused the camera. Oh, wait a minute. I can do something with that. And that would become part of George Melies' technique. He would stop the camera and change things and start the camera back up. So if you've ever seen his from a trip to the moon, some of his early footage, they're full of people suddenly appearing and disappearing and appearing and disappearing. And it was really quite spectacular. And it was the first kind of thing anyone had done that. So right from the beginning, seeing what you could do, seeing what you could present to people on the screen that was not like anything they had ever seen, that's a big part of film history. It always has been. So I know sometimes it seems frustrating. We're so surrounded by these movies, especially all these comic book movies with all these explosions and stuff like that. But the truth is, that's what film's always been. It's always been about experimentation. It's always been about visual tricks. It's always been about trying to present you with something on the screen that you do not see in the real world. And that's part of what makes film so fascinating for us, is that we can do that, see things like that. And so the first movie I want to start with was a movie made in 1925, and it was the work of an animator named Willis O'Brien, who was known as Obie to his friends. He was the first person to begin experimenting extensively with what we today call stop motion photography. There had been earlier experiments with this kind of thing, short little small things. There had been an early 1910 version of Frankenstein where they didn't use stop motion, but they used the idea of building up a character that Frankenstein comes to life in this big vat. And it was a big wax figure they had made, and they had melted him down and then ran the camera in reverse so that it looked like he was rising up out of the vat. That was in 1910. And so using camera pacing, speeding stuff up and slowing stuff down, was an early way of experimentation. So stop motion is where you create a little puppet. You have a metal armature that has arms and legs and a head and a mouth that move, and you cover them usually with rubber, and you make a creature out of it, some sort of monster or a dinosaur or something like that, and you move it a little bit every frame. It is unbelievably slow process, incredibly time consuming, but it became a way when they developed what's called split screening and matte screening and rear projection. Their techniques evolved to where you could take something that images you have taken of a small little puppet and put them in a context where they're surrounded by large people or ordinary people or small people, so that the figure suddenly looks big. And the first time this was ever done, I'm going to try and show you the image of this. One of our technical difficulties today was getting the pictures to come up. So if this comes up, hopefully you will see a picture here. And I can't see if it's coming up, of The Lost World in 1925. This is the famous Arthur Conan Doyle short novel about Professor Challenger. Professor Challenger decides he is going to go. He has heard a story that a plateau in South America has dinosaurs on it. And so he goes in quest of the dinosaurs. And so when they decide to make a movie like this, for the first time, you're faced with a situation: can we create the image within the screen of a giant monster and small human beings? And Willis O'Brien was the first one to really experiment with this, to create dinosaurs in the same frame with ordinary people, with the people huddling down in front of them and the giants towering over them. It is absolutely terrific. I've got a picture here of Willis O'Brien working on one of his creatures here. And this is actually from Mighty Joe Young, a much later movie he did. But everything's done with puppets and moving around like that and moving them a little bit at a time. It really is an extraordinary way to do stuff. Here's another image. This is from The Lost World. And you see here, you have the dinosaurs, the fighting and all that kind of stuff. This is the first time you had multiple puppet creatures like this fighting on a screen, an attempt to recreate an ancient prehistoric world. And no one had ever really done that. And no one had done this on this scale. And I will tell you that you can see this movie. When I was doing my preparation for this program, almost all the books I looked at talking about this movie from 1925 lamented the fact that the complete movie was lost. Only a 60-minute abridgment of it was available. But that is no longer true. A couple of years ago, someone found in an archive the complete movie, and it is now available, can you believe it, on YouTube. Not only has it been completely restored and remastered, it's a beautiful transfer. They've added a soundtrack to it because it's a silent film. All movies had music. There was no such thing as a silent film actually in the 19 teens. You know, if you went to the theater, it was never silent. Sometimes there may be nothing but a guy on a piano or a person on an organ, but there was always musical accompaniment. But someone has written a score to this movie on YouTube, and they even used some of the tinting. Color was not possible in the 1920s, but you would do what was known as tinting the screen. They would put a filter over it. So in other words, at nighttime, there would be a blue filter. When they're in the jungle in The Lost World, there's a green filter. At the end, there's a volcanic explosion. And so there's a red filter. And that has been restored as well. So the movie I am talking about, made in the 1925, you can see on YouTube. And I highly recommend seeing it too, because Willis O'Brien did all the special effects. He created the models, and this led to his really big job. A man named Marion C. Cooper, who had been doing nature films, wanted to move into the big screen, doing a big creature film. And he saw that Willis O'Brien was working on a new movie that was later canceled called Creation. And when he saw O'Brien's dinosaurs marching on the screen, he went up to him. He said, "I love what you're doing. This is absolutely terrific. I have a question for you. Do you think you could animate a great big giant ape? Because I got an idea for a big gorilla movie." And the result, my friends, is King Kong. Now, it is going to be tough for me to rein myself in talking about King Kong. I love King Kong. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. And I'll tell you a story about it that I think says much about this movie's power and effect. Years ago, I was a music and DVD manager at Barnes & Noble in Hickory, North Carolina, which is where I'm from, if you're wondering about this voice. And so I worked at Hickory at Barnes & Noble, and I was there in 2005 when Peter Jackson's huge, epic King Kong came out. Now, I was excited about that, but I wasn't quite as excited about that as I was excited about something else that was going to happen. As they often do when there's a big budget remake, studios will go back and bring out the original movie, whatever it is that's being currently remade. And so in 2005, they issued for the first time a deluxe edition of the original King Kong. Prior to this, King Kong was extremely hard to find. It was available on DVD in a fairly bad transfer, and that was the only one that was really out there. And it was hard to get because I know I had tried many times. So this reissue was the first time King Kong, which was made in 1933, had gotten the real deal treatment. It was a new transfer. They had restored some images to it, and it came with all kinds of extras. I have it right here. And it's got like documentaries and the featurettes and all the stuff that it gets when it gets the treatment, and including a recreated scene that Peter Jackson did that was in the original storyboarding, but was apparently never shot. And so using the technology from the time, Peter Jackson reshot that lost scene, and you can actually see that inserted to it as well. So I was thrilled. And so this, and one of the advantages, frankly, of being the manager of your department is that you can choose what goes on display. And so when that movie came out, I had this gigantic display of all the new King Kong, the classic King Kong. So one day this old man comes in and he stops at it and he picks up a copy of King Kong, and I march over and I say, "Oh, sir, that is the original King Kong that has just been reissued on DVD in a brand new and beautiful transfer." And he said, oh yes, I love this movie. I saw this movie when it came out." And I said, "You saw King Kong in 1933? He's like, "Yes, I was 10 years old. And when I was a kid, when I was living in New York City, and it cost a dime to go see movies. And I never had a dime. But I found out that if I could find a young couple who walks up to the ticket screen to get their tickets, and they're all lovey-dovey with each other, I could go stand beside them because I was real little. And I could stand beside them. And then when they got their tickets, when they walked to the front entrance, I would keep them between me and the ticket lady at the front. And when the young gentleman would open the door so that his lady could go in, I would dart under his arm and I would run into the theater. And if you could get past the ticket person and get all the way to the back and up the stairs into the balcony, they wouldn't come after you. If they caught you coming in, they would send you back out. But if you got past them and could get to the balcony, they'd never come and look for you. And that is how I saw King Kong 72 years ago. And so these things stay with you, don't they? I absolutely love that. That's one of my favorite stories about it. And I felt the same way. King Kong, there's nothing quite like it. I'm going to move here to another image that I absolutely love. Here we are. This is the famous fight with the Tyrannosaurus Rex. One of the most extraordinary scenes in this whole movie is the big fight scene between the T-Rex and King Kong. I remember seeing it when I was a kid. It never loses any of its effect. It's still an astonishing thing. Murray Spivak did all the sound effects to this movie. And King Kong is distinctive for a lot of things, not only visual things, but also the use of sound. The howling of the monsters, the sound of all of the jungle when they're on Skull Island, the music. Here's your trivia for the evening, or your first bit of trivia for the evening. King Kong is the first movie to have a score written for its entire length. Prior to this, most movies had a little bit of music at the beginning and a little bit of music at the end. But King Kong was the first movie to have an accompanying score. In other words, the score matches what's happening on the screen completely. In fact, because Max Steiner was such a great composer, a lot of the sound effects are in the score. The drums are in the score. There's a moment where King Kong has Fay Ray in his hand, Andero, the character, and he will kind of make little gestures at her, and the music on the score will go, and there's all kinds of things like that in the score where Max Steiner coordinated what was happening on the screen to the music that was running along with it. Now, of course, we think now, well, of course, that's what film scores do. No one had done that prior to this movie. King Kong's the first movie to have a full score written for it, and so that's just one ways in which they did a lot of things. Well, I'll tell you one other quick thing about Kong that I love. One of my favorite scenes early in the movie when they get to Skull Island is they're out walking into the looking for Andera, who has been carted off by King Kong, and a Stegosaurus, a big giant dinosaur, comes into view, and it comes rushing toward them, and they shoot it, and it falls over dead. And then there's this scene where all the members of the group who are going in search all go walking past the big dinosaur. And the dinosaur is moving around, they're walking around. And one of them says, "What do you think that is?" And one of the other characters says, "It's something from the prehistoric era." And they're walking past this huge dinosaur that they have just shot. And you can see it breathing. You can see its tail flopping. But what's fascinating about that scene is when they shot that scene, none of those characters are actually walking past it. Everyone, all the characters, all the people in that shot are walking on a treadmill. They're not moving at all. It's the camera view of the dinosaur that's moving, and they are just walking on a treadmill. One of many, many things about that movie that is visually innovative. They found out so many different ways to do stuff, and it truly is. It's a wonderful thing. And I assume you've seen it, but you never get tired of King Kong. So we're going to go back to, let's see. Oh, that's not the one I want. So let me see if I can find the picture I want. There we go. And one more King Kong picture up on top of the Empire State Building, grabbing the planes and stuff like that. Another great scene, one of the key moments visually as well. That's a huge painted backdrop there. And one of the things you notice in King Kong is that the fur and stuff like that kind of crinkles during the course of it moving. And that's because the model had to be touched by Willis O'Brien and Marcel Degato, who also built a lot of these props. So it was tough work, and it took a long time to do these things. So I want to move on to one more movie that was done by Willis O'Brien, and that is Mighty Joe Young. And this was a little later, 1949. This is one of the last movies O'Brien worked on. And again, we got a big giant monkey. But this time, too, there's a real advance. This is about 10 years later. This is 1949. And Mighty Joe Young was really the most striking movie of its year. It's much more advanced. We've got all kinds of animals. It's about a circus and the finding of this big gorilla that they take back to civilization, of course. So there's an echo there of King Kong. Some of the characters are even the same, but it's absolutely wonderful. And there's a couple of movies I want to plug here that you may not have seen or heard of before. And if you haven't seen Mighty Joe Young, it's absolutely something to check out. And Mighty Joe Young is important for another reason too, because one of the assistants, in fact, the man who did a lot of the work working with Willis O'Brien on this movie, Mighty Joe Young, was a young animator and illustrator and a man with big dreams of things he wanted to do on the screen, a man named Ray Harryhausen. Now, for me, the name Ray Harryhausen has as much magic as the name Merlin. I mean, I would get excited watching the opening credits and just see special effects by Ray Harryhausen. It was the greatest thing ever. And so we're going to look at some of his movies because he was the next big stage in the 1950s. Something happened, again, related to King Kong in 1952. In 1952, King Kong was reissued. They used to do this back in those days, run the old classic movies back around. Well, King Kong in 1952 was reissued around the theaters in the United States, and it made over $3 million. A 20-year-old movie was one of the biggest selling movies of the year. And finally, other producers and other production companies begin to think, hey, why don't we go back to making monster movies? There really had not been a lot of it done in these years. And so this triggers a kind of reboot in the 1950s. Monsters come back into the movies. And the first one and the most important one, really, I'm going to take a moment and delete all my images out of here. The first one and one of the most important one was called The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Let's see if I can bring that image up. Oop, that's not it. Hang on just one moment. I'll leave that up. That's another shot of, that's a scene from Mighty Joe Young, which I definitely think you should look up. Here we go. This is The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. The idea here is that a bunch of scientists are up in the Arctic doing mysterious, questionable things, probably keeping an eye on the Soviets primarily. And so they detonate an explosion. They detonate a bomb up in the Arctic, and it wakes something up. The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms then makes its way, marching through the water, going all the way up from the Arctic Circle, all the way down, finding its way somehow to Manhattan. And of course, you get one of the very first scenes of a dinosaur tromping through a city and smashing it to smithereens, something dear to the heart of all of us who love these kind of things. Now, I will tell you too, that this was a bit of a change too. Let me tell you a wonderful thing about stop motion photography. It is fairly inexpensive. Props are not that much. If you've got a great creator like Ray Harryhausen, for example, you've got someone who can create these models. It's not costly to do in terms of materials. So that's the good news. These kind of effects in film are not expensive. The bad news is they take an incredibly long time to do. And that's a problem. For example, in the scene, there's a scene in King Kong where a pterodactyl comes down. Kong has laid down, as he was prone to do, laid down Andaro and gone wandering off. And so something is coming to get her. And a big pterodactyl flies down and picks her up. And King Kong comes back and he chases and he fights the pterodactyl. And that scene is about 2 minutes in the movie. It took them 7 weeks to shoot those 2 minutes. Okay, that's at a time when it took, on average, 4 weeks to make a complete movie. You see the problem. It takes up too much time to do this kind of animation. And Ray Harryhausen was able to make this kind of thing surge back up in the 1950s because he found ways to incorporate a stop motion figure into existing footage. In other words, you can see what they've done here. They have taken a picture of an actual street in New York City with the moving cars and everything, and they have added their monster to it very, very effectively. That's what Ray Harryhausen did. You can't recreate multiple miniature scenes, all of which are having to moving and be coordinated. That takes too much time. If you stick, though, to just one animated creature in footage that is already pre-shot, it's much cheaper. It's because it's much faster. And so this is one of the things Ray Harryhausen did. And so The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms is just one of the first ones to really do this kind of thing. And it was important for another reason too, because it would lead to another great monster tale. The year after this movie came out, 1954, in January, US military exploded a hydrogen bomb over the Bikini Atoll in the Southern Pacific. The explosion was at least, we don't really know for sure, but at least 100 times more powerful than they had expected it to be. It was 1,000 times bigger than the explosion over Hiroshima. And one of the things it did was send a massive cloud of radiation across the Pacific. And some Japanese fishermen in a boat called the Lucky Dragon No. 5 were exposed to it. They saw the blast, they saw the light, and they felt the ash coming down on them when the cloud fell. By the time a week later they got back to Japan, they were all extremely sick with radiation sickness. And my friends, by 1954, the people in Japan could identify radiation sickness quite well and very quickly. And so this leads to the first protest of nuclear weapons and the idea of these things being blown up, this stuff being sent up in the air. And the producer of the Toho Productions, which was a film company in Japan that made mostly World War II movies, read the story in the paper about what had been going on, the protests in Japan, and he saw a review of 20,000, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. And these came together in the idea of creating a monster that is brought back as a result of nuclear testing. And of course, as you can see where I'm going with this is Godzilla. This is the creation in 1954 of Gojira, which was the first Japanese movie that created what they would call a kaiju, a monster. And now this movie for many years was not available in its original Japanese version. What they did, Gojira came out in 1954, and in 1956, an American company got access to it. They filmed about a dozen or so scenes with the actor Raymond Burr, who would go on to be Perry Mason, and they slotted him into scenes of the original and dubbed the others. So there are two versions of the movie, a Japanese version and a later on re-edited and somewhat shuffled around American version. And this starts the whole Godzilla thing. It is a huge thing. And I would recommend very much for you to see the original Gojira, which is now available. Usually when you buy the original Godzilla, you get both versions. And both versions are quite interesting. But the first one, the original movie, which starts out with a bunch of fishermen on a boat. And if you look carefully among the writings on one of the floats for the boat, it says number 5. So it's a clear reference here to men being exposed to radiation. And so the first movie deals with, what are we doing with our technology? What is happening to our world with some of the stuff we're doing? What are we releasing with this? The idea here is that Godzilla was some creature who lived under the ground, and the explosions has released it. Other Godzilla movies will pick up variants of this, the idea that Godzilla is some sort of mutation as a result of experimentations in the Southern Pacific. And so this becomes a big part of the story. Godzilla is hugely, hugely popular. And it's kind of strange. More than one commentator has noted the fact that, less than 10 years after bombs fell on Tokyo, the Japanese loved going and watching a monster chomp through the city and smash it down. There are scenes in the original Godzilla that are extremely disturbing to watch because they match exactly footage you see of the firebombing of Tokyo and what the cities looked like after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so there's something that makes these movies important. And they did a lot of them. The last record, I think there's 35 Godzilla movies. There's lots of Godzilla movies. And it's said too that as the series progressed, they kind of aimed at younger and younger kids. The argument being because by then, they're aiming at kids who want toys of the dinosaurs and Godzilla and all of the Godzilla creatures. But the first couple of movies, Godzilla Returns and Mothra versus Godzilla, bring in a whole set of characters. My own personal favorite is Ghidorah, the 3-headed monster dragon. So these movies would run, and they were an important part for my life because I discovered the Godzilla movies in after-school television, usually played on extremely obscure television stations. And my memories of watching Godzilla when I was 15 years old are tied irrevocably to fighting the rabbit ear antennas to try to get the picture to come into some sort of focus just for a few minutes, at least for the big fight at the end. Please clear up for the big fight at the end, please. And so you're fighting the TV to watch these kind of things. So it is no surprise to me that these movies were hugely popular when they came out on VHS tapes. And I knew several people who had walls full of Godzilla movies because finally we could see them without them being chopped up into pictures and without chopped up into commercials and all that kind of stuff too. So that was really wonderful. When Godzilla, became a whole phenomenon. And so I'm gonna see if I can find one of my Godzilla pictures. I apologize, my pictures are not it's just coming up photo. So I don't know which one's which. So so I'll move on now to the next movie. This right here, this is another Ray Harryhausen monster. He called it the Ymir, Y-M-I-R. It is from a movie called 20 Million Miles to Earth. And this is a Venusian, a creature from Venus. The movie opens with a ship crash landing that has gone to Venus and has come back with some little animal, a little bitty small creature that, as you can see here, grows into a very big creature and a very upset and worried and scary creature. It's one of the first movies, too, that Ray Harryhausen did using original footage. In fact, this was filmed in Rome. So you have a wonderful setup of this big giant monster stomping around ancient Rome, the remains of ancient Rome, rather, and knocking over columns and stuff like that. Harryhausen said that the reason that this movie was in Rome is because he wanted to go to Rome. So he wrote the script and set the story in Rome so that he could go there and they could film all the primary footage of all of the buildings and everything like that. He animates the Ymir and then puts it into it as well. And this is also one of the best. I'm not a fan of colorization, but a couple of years ago, they colorized this movie extremely effectively because it was able to really kind of, Ray Harryhausen was involved in this. And so he kind of oversaw the creation of some of the new effects that they done with the colorization too. And so this is another movie that you probably never heard of, 20 Million Miles to Earth. But it's absolutely worth checking out because of the great Ymir tromping around. And there's a fabulous scene, too, where this creature gets in a fight with an elephant. Absolutely worth it. So, and there we are. That's the picture. That's the original poster for it. In color, you see there. But it was not originally in color. It's from 1957, I believe. And so it was not originally in color. But the coloration that they did of it was quite well done. So let's see if I can find. All right, which brings us to the 1950s and the later stage of Ray Harryhausen's career, which is the Sinbad movies. Now, these don't always have dinosaurs, but they usually have something big. And the seventh voyage of Sinbad, of course, has a cyclops and a dragon. Well, I don't know about you, but when I'm looking for great big giant monsters, I'm completely okay with a cyclops and a dragon. And the Sinbad movies were the first really bigger budget stuff. They were in color. This one actually was 1958. Dynamation was the word that the producer, the man who produced all of Ray Harryhausen's movies, a man named Charles Sneer, and Harryhausen, this is the term they came up with. You know, we call this stop motion, but that was a later term actually that was applied to it. The word they came up with was dynamation. And in the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and I remember when this movie first came out, when I first heard of it, I should say, I wasn't actually around when it came out. But when I first heard about this movie, I was really upset because how did I miss the first 6 voyages? You mean there's 6 more? There's 6 more stories? Why is the 7th one the only one that's around? Well, the 7th one was the first one that they did. And but this was the first time too that a really big color palette could be used in one of these movies, you know. So the stop motion, and it's much different, you know, when you're using black and white, you know, that's one type of animation. But shifting to full color is another one as well. And so the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad was the first one to do that, and it would lead to 3 ultimately Sinbad movies later on in the late 70s. He would do the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. And the Golden Voyage is probably the best of the 3, but all of them are worth watching. There's always something really fascinating about it. And there's always great fights. There's a fight with a centaur and a griffin in the Golden Voyage. And so, so one of the things that Ray Harryhausen always made sure was to give you a good fight scene of the monsters. And so the Sinbad movies are a huge amount of fun and worth checking out. Here's a picture. This is Ray Harryhausen. And these are the creatures that are from the Golden Voyage of Sinbad. So there he is. He kept all of these models. And I will tell you that the last movie Harryhausen did was from 1981. He did Clash of the Titans, the last movie that really used stop motion. As you all know, circa 1977, something happened in cinema that changed everything. And that, of course, was Star Wars. And so Star Wars was a whole new game in how animation was going to be done, and the emergence of community. Now, if you know your Star Wars well, the first Star Wars movie, that is the first release, the fourth movie, A New Hope, contains one stop motion sequence. And that's when Chewbacca is playing that game of a kind of chess game with R2-D2. And they're moving these huge animated figures onto the board. Those were actually stop motion created, the only stop motion in the movie. So the technology was there, but it was definitely a sense that things were changing, that they were moving on to a world of computer animation. Now, Ray Harryhausen lived until 2013. So he lived another 30 years after he quit making movies. And this was absolutely glorious. You know why? Because he was around to talk about all of these. So when all of the Ray Harryhausen movies were done, and they even did a 7-disc, I think it was, Ray Harryhausen edition of his movies. When they reissued all of these classic movies I've been talking about, when they come out on DVD, they all come with an interview of Ray Harryhausen. They all come with a commentary track of Ray Harryhausen going through and telling you what he did. It is the only instance I know of where a major creator involved in all of these movies is available to explain what he was doing. And so, and there is even on the King Kong I have, he's even on there doing a commentary track. So you get to sit down with Ray and watch King Kong. And so it's a unique circumstance is that the animator of all of these great movies was around when all these movies were being put on DVD and could provide commentary for it. He also wrote a number of books. I want to show you one here in this little corner, if you can see. It's called The Art of Ray Harryhausen, and I recommend it very highly. He also did a book called Ray Harryhausen, An Animated Life, another big tome with lots and lots of pictures. Apparently, Ray kept everything. All of the models from all of his movies, he kept all of it and still had all of it, and there's lots of pictures of it. And so he tells about how he came about doing all these kind of things. And it really is, it's just tremendous. And I had a photo of, if I can find it. Pause with me just a moment. Let me get some of these pictures out of the way so I can bring up some more. Oop, that's not it. That's not what I want. Okay, just a moment. Let me see if I can. Okay, here we are. So let's go with this. This is another one of the Ray Harryhausens I wanted to talk about. Cowboys and dinosaurs. Who doesn't love the idea of cowboys and dinosaurs? In 1969, Ray Harryhausen oversaw the production of a movie that actually had the idea had been something that Willis O'Brien, back who had done King Kong, had been toying with and had never done. It's a movie called The Valley of the Guangzhi. And the Guangzhi is a kind of Mexican or Spanish term for a demon. And it's kind of a lost world scenario. The idea is that there is this valley somewhere out in Mexico or Texas where dinosaurs are still there. But the greatness of the story is the story happens in the year 1900. So what you get is people on horses chasing dinosaurs. In fact, one of the key scenes in this movie is when these 4 riders with their ropes try to lasso the T-Rex in a scene that apparently took 4 months to animate. And so Valley of the Guangzhi is absolutely worth looking for. It did not get a lot of attention when it came out because by this point, these kind of movies, the studios just were not behind. The 1970s was a huge transition in film. And, Star Wars has not happened yet. And as you know from science fiction movies from these years too, they were thin on the ground. And so Ray Harryhausen actually had debated retiring, saying he was done with all. But fortunately, he came along in the 7th voyage of Sinbad, which came later. And so he stayed at least in the business for another decade, thank goodness. But the Valor of the Guangzhi is one that I really recommend to you because it's not that well known, but it has some fabulous scenes. The whole thing ends with the dinosaur coming into a gigantic cathedral and a spectacular ending of that. And so that's worth checking out too. Now, one of the things that Star Wars did, of course, was bring in a really glorious age of mostly science fiction movies. Monsters were a little thinner on the ground, really, all the way up into the 1980s. There wasn't a whole lot going on. And so when it looked like there was going to be some rebooting of some of these things, I was happy. In 1976, Dino De Laurentiis gave us the worst King Kong ever. An absolutely awful, awful King Kong with Jessica Lange as the Fay Wray character. Several people have commented afterward, it's astonishing Jessica Lange went on to any kind of a career after a first movie like that. She did, of course, she won an Academy Award. But it was the technology just wasn't there. They couldn't do any CGI thing yet. So you've got a guy in a big suit. They're not going to do, stop motion for something like this. So it was an attempt to reboot King Kong, and it failed miserably. And so we had to wait till 1990s and Jurassic Park. Now, here's another moment for me in my life of going to films. It's going to Jurassic Park for the first time because it felt like finally, dinosaurs on the screen that looked believable. They when they stomped the ground, you could feel it. When they roared, you could hear it echoing. And so I was thrilled about that. And I learned an interesting trivia bit about Jurassic Park. When Spielberg was putting Jurassic Park together, he asked Ray Harryhausen to be involved in the project, just as a consultant or whatever he wanted to do. And Harryhausen said he didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. He didn't want to get involved in computer animation. And he said something real interesting. I saw an interview with him and someone asked him about this, weren't you asked to be part of Jurassic Park? And you said no. And he said, I think that giant creatures on the screen are less convincing the more real they look. And he didn't like the fact that a lot of the CGI was aiming at making these things fit in completely in with their world. He said, when I animated the stuff I did for my movies, the idea was for something to look like it was not part of our world at all. And I thought, what an odd reaction to that. But then I remembered something that had happened when I was watching the original King Kong with my 8-year-old son, Christopher. We were watching King Kong, as I tended to make them do quite frequently. And suddenly we were sitting there it was my dad's house, and he had a big widescreen TV, and me and my son were propped up watching it. And my mom walked in the room. And she stood there for a moment and watched this old 1933 movie. And she turns to my son and she says, "Doesn't that look real?" And my 8-year-old son looked up at her and said, "No, because it doesn't look real." But it works. It completely pulls you in. No, it doesn't look real, but there's something magical about it. And it pulls you into the story. And so sometimes I think Ray Harryhausen may indeed have been onto something there about that. There's something, it doesn't have to look real to pull you into the story, to make you care about what's going on. So I think that's an interesting point to make. Well, the Jurassic Park, of course, has exploded. There were 3 Jurassic Park movies. The second one wasn't too great. I thought the third one was pretty good. And then we get Jurassic World, a massive reboot. And I will never forget sitting in the theater and watching the trailer for the first Jurassic World movie. So they show you these scenes of the dinosaurs, and they show you scenes of Bryce Dallas Howard. And I remember sitting there thinking, dinosaurs and a beautiful redheaded woman. That is everything I want in a movie. Absolutely everything. So I was thrilled with it. And so the movies are fun. And then there's a second one called Fallen Kingdom as well. And so you can see that the dinosaurs are up and running now. The Jurassic Park movies have brought them to life. And we have been able to see over the course of the last decade, a wonderful rebooting of all of this. First of all, we have to talk, though, about the really dreadful 1998 reboot of Godzilla, the one with Matthew Broderick. Oh, my gosh. I was so excited about this. We're going to, because it's time. It's the late 90s. It's time for Godzilla to move on to something bigger. and to go somewhere new with it. And so when they announced that there was going to be a big, Roland Emmerich, who had done Independence Day, was going to do it, there was a big budget, and it was a train wreck. It was supposed to be a trilogy, but the movie sank so badly that they didn't make any of the others. There's all kinds of things wrong with it, mainly just the monster. It's the creature itself. Godzilla just doesn't look right. And he's always running. Someone commented on the fact in one of the reviews, all the scenes of that 98 Godzilla is of Godzilla running through the city and the tail disappearing around the corner and doing all these kind of things. And one commentator said, it looks like a cat being chased by the vacuum cleaner. And which is absolutely true. And so that one just didn't work at all. But finally, if I can get a picture of this, I want to bring it up. But finally, we got, okay, that is the remake of King Kong, which, well, since the picture's there, I'll talk about that too, because that came up, and then we'll come back to Godzilla. Yes, the 2005 remake of King Kong. Vividly remember that. As I said, I was working at a music video section when that was happening, so I was all over that. I think it's marvelous. I think the most brilliant insight Peter Jackson had with his King Kong was not to make the mistake the last people had made. Don't update it. Don't bring it to 19 whatever. Leave it back there in the 1930s. First of all, because the whole notion of exploration and the thing of the finding of the Maya ruins and all these kind of things, the golden age of adventure was the 1920s in literature and in real life. And so keeping the story part of that was exactly the right thing to do. It's epic. It's epic with a capital E. I mean, hey, why have one T-Rex when you can have 3, right? Why have 2 or 3 brontosauruses when you can have 50 of them, stampeding? Yeah, okay, it's definitely over the top, probably too long. But it's also beautifully done, and it handled the situation. I think the 1976 version with Jessica Lange showed how badly it can go if you try too hard to create some sort of relationship between a 5'8" woman and a 60-foot tall creature. Okay, you have to handle that carefully to make that believable, and that is precisely what I think Jackson did. I think this movie is very convincing because time was spent on letting us see these two creatures, which is what they are, come to some sort of understanding to each other. I thought it was really well done. Yes, it's too long. Yes, there's too much of everything probably, but I loved it, and I think it did a tremendous job bringing it to life too. And I know it's going to sound like I don't do anything with my son but make him see King Kong. But I want to tell you a quick story. I took my son. Me and my dad went and took my son to see Peter Jackson's King Kong in 2005. So he was about, I guess he would have been 12. And so there's a scene where, King Kong is climbing the Empire State Building. And when he gets up to the top, he knocks the tower off and he jumps up on top and he yells. And my son jumped out of his seat and got up into the floor and just bellowed, yes. And so that was really wonderful, because if it had been me, I would have done that, absolutely. And because that's what these movies do for us, cheering at the end is something that's an important part of these kind of things too. Is these big epic movies should do that. I mean, I think it's sad sometimes when one of these gigantic special effects movies come to a crashing explosion, and people just quietly get up and walk out of the theater, usually without bothering to watch any of the credits. So that was just that. My son doing that reminded me. One reason why we love movies is stuff like that. So let me mention a couple of other things that I really like. The Host. This was a Korean horror movie. If I can get back to my, this is a very striking movie. It's really weird the way it starts. This weird little ooze-like thing is hanging from a bridge in the opening scene. And it drops into the water, and we see a really extraordinary transformation. This is a wonderful example of what a movie can do without a really big budget. The Host doesn't have a gigantic budget, but they managed to make a very convincing and quite creepy movie. And so there are several scenes of this creature running along the beach that are absolutely spectacular. I mean, it's one of those moments. Even now, we're so jaded with all the things they see, but Even now I look at the scenes of the beach or the creature when it's running along the beach and think, how did they do that? How did they do that? That looks so real. That is so effective. So if you allow me, I'm just going to, since I don't know what pictures I've got, I'm just going to pull some things up and show you that I have among my pictures. Here we are. There we go. Fighting about the woman. This is the monster and the girls is what I titled this picture. The monster and the girl. And like I say, this is from Peter Jackson's King Kong. And here we go. One of the reboots of Godzilla was this movie from 2016 called Shin Godzilla. Now, this was a Japanese-made Godzilla movie, a very striking and a very strange one. Probably one of the strangest ones ever, really. I recommend seeing it because, as you can see with this fabulous picture, Godzilla is one of the most striking Godzilla creations ever. Not a man in a suit for the first time. All Godzilla movies were a man in a suit. But this time they used computer-generated stuff. There's several scenes, almost documentary style in this movie, where people are running on the street and someone's holding a camera up and you can see Godzilla walking among the buildings, something that had never been in a Godzilla movie before. There's also a bit of a spoof too. This movie feels like a bit of a spoof of Godzilla movies, but done lovingly, done with a lot of fun. And so it's called Shin Godzilla. It came out in 2016, right at the time a bunch of these monster movies are coming out, and didn't get as much attention as it should. Some people think it's a little too odd for its own good. Maybe so. But I think it's absolutely worth checking out. The Godzilla creature, at the very least, is absolutely fabulous and worth spending a little bit of time seeing. So let me see if I can find. Cloverfield. There are two movies that I went to as an adult with my teenage kids. And both of them were spectacular experiences, because for the first time since probably I was 16 or 17, I was in the theater with a full crowd. My preferred method of movie going is to pick a matinee on a day when I'm pretty much hoping nobody's going to be there. I like to watch a movie, and I reviewed films for years. Down in North Carolina, I had a film review show, and we would always, go and see an early movie version of the movie. Go at 2:00 when there's nobody there. And you get used to that. You get used to nobody or a handful of people. You get used to it to some extent, not being an actual community experience. You're by yourself, you're watching your movie. But but you can't, but when you're in a theater packed, and for Cloverfield and for Paranormal Activity, two movies my teenage kids took me to, in both of those instances, this was like a Saturday night. There was not an empty seat in the house. And I'm telling you, it was incredible to watch these two movies with a full crowd. It was really something. Cloverfield is one of these found footage type movies. Like, I guess the first one to really gain a lot of attention like this was the Blair Witch Project. And it's about a creature that comes ashore in New York City and starts trampling around. And the story takes a handful of people who are at a party. Therefore, they've got a camera that they're videoing the party, and the party breaks up and everybody runs for their lives. So you've got the guy running around with his camera, filming everything that happens. Some people have problems with these kind of movies. They get dizzy at them. I've heard a lot of people say they couldn't watch the Blair Witch Project on the screen, on the big screen. They got sick. They had to get them leave because of the shakiness and stuff like that. I don't have that effect, but I can certainly understand that being the case for some people. But this is one of the greatest monster movies ever made. Cloverfield is absolutely riveting. And I'm telling you, seeing it on the big screen the way I did, I sat there spellbound. I was completely pulled in. One of the things about these kind of found footage movies, and there's a lot of them now, is you're kind of squeezed in there with the people experiencing it. You're seeing it the way they see it, or you're seeing it in just, it's not these kind of glossy high-tech versions of a movie. It's intentionally rough. It's intentionally shaking and moving around like that. And this can be incredibly effective. And to have done that kind of thing, I mean, Blair Witch with a bunch of people tromping around the woods and three characters is one thing, but to do it on this scale, to have a giant monster loose in the city. At one point, they're in a helicopter and the characters experience a helicopter crash. And it's all done with someone holding a camera during the whole thing. Absolutely spectacular. And it's absolutely one of the great ones. And so I think it's absolutely worth seeing. I'm pulling up a couple of things now just because I have them on my screen. The most recent brings Godzilla Kong together. The Kong reboot, the Godzilla reboot. They have a name for this, They call it the Monsterverse. That's where we are, the Monsterverse. So we have the 3 Godzilla movies, the Godzilla Reboot, a much better one in, when did they do that? In 2014, just called Godzilla with Bryan Cranston and Juliette Binoche briefly. I had problems with that because it was too dark. The whole movie seemed to take place in the rain, in the dark, and that's extremely frustrating. You want to see the monsters fighting, but it's a dark movie. I'm not sure why they did that. Usually you do something like that so that the special effects were, if you do special effects of monsters fighting in broad daylight, they've got to be extremely good. If you do them late at night in the rain, well, you can get away with a lot. And so Godzilla, I would have thought would have had enough budget to do that. They got better about that. Godzilla King of the Monsters, which came out in 2019, was absolutely fabulous. In fact, I will go on the record and say that Godzilla King of the Monsters that came out a few years ago, I think it was 2019, that was the Godzilla movie I waited all my life for. It truly was. I thought it was absolutely spectacular. I was watching it thinking, this is what I've wanted all along. Also, too, as I mentioned earlier, my favorite monster from these years is Ghidorah, King Ghidorah. And so it was great to see that 3-headed dragon brought back in a new version. And the picture I have up here, Godzilla vs. Kong, which I think is only available on DVD the last couple of weeks. So you may not have seen it, so I won't give any spoilers or anything like that. I thought it was terrific, though. I thought it was. I thought these movies have been really good. The cast is good. The scripts are pretty good, and the visuals are really spectacular. And so it's kind of cool to see that, to be able to do a program like this, talking about monster movies when monster movies are bigger than ever. I mean, there were years, the late 70s through most of the 80s, where there was simply nothing being done like this. You didn't have your big monster tromping through anything. And so for someone like me, an old school monster guy, it was particularly great to see these things coming together, to see all these movies with these budgets finally being done in a good kind of way. And yet also, too, the movies nodding to the traditions, the Kong movies in particular, Kong Skull Island and King Kong before that, and now this one, too. There's a really conscious effort to kind of tie these movies to the earlier traditions of them, too. Kong on the Island in particular. And so it's great to see that. I think that we are living right this moment in a golden time for these movies. So I'm hoping that you've heard a couple of things here that you would like to see. I hope I've touched on a couple of things. I want very much to find the last picture I have in my lineup. So let me see if I can get to that and see if it can bring up my last picture. Yes, here we go. This is the last image on Jurassic Park. I saw Jurassic Park 5 times at the theater when it came out because I knew you got to see this on the big screen. And the movie ends with, of course, the dinosaurs have gotten loose. Why do this if you don't have dinosaurs who get loose? The dinosaurs have gotten loose and have taken over the park as they do movie after movie. And so in this was the main entrance hall in Jurassic Park, the park. And so at the end of the movie, the dinosaurs have gotten loose, they're running crazy, and this big banner called "When Dinosaurs Rule the Earth" comes floating down as the dinosaur is yelling. And I did not jump up and say, yes, as my son had the nerve to do, but I could have done it when I saw that moment, when that streamer comes down with "Dinosaurs Rule the Earth." That's what I love. I love dinosaur movies and monster movies like that. And so I am mostly done with the program I was going to do. I hope some of these things you can work checking out. If you have questions or anything like that, I would love for us to open it up if you would like to have some questions, or if you want to just recommend something. There's all kinds of things here I have not talked about. I wrote some of them down that I did not get around to. Gorgo is one that I meant to mention and I didn't get a chance to. And so there's lots of these things out there that are worth seeing. And so if you would like to contribute anything, that would be great. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in to the Zoom program. Thank the Friends of the Library. Thank the wonderful Greenfield Public Library, which is so supportive for stuff that we do like this. Thank all of you for taking the time in your lives to sit down and hear about these movies. And I would love to hear back from some of you about things that we all have our monster moment, the moment that made us a monster movie fan. And I have mine. I'm sure you have yours. And so if you would like to share, if that's okay, we can open it up briefly for you to, if you would like to share something with us that this has prompted in you, or a movie that you love that I didn't mention. So I'll hand it over to Lisa, our host.
We've got a few minutes left, and I want to thank Gary for doing this tonight. This was a lot of fun. Please feel free to unmute yourself and make your video live. If you do have any questions, we are recording, just to let everybody be aware of that. Or if you want to pop a message in the chat or something. This has been a lot of fun. I had heard of a lot of these movies because my mother was a monster movie fan, but I haven't seen a lot of them myself. And we'll give everybody a minute or so. And if no one is interested in sharing, we will.
A lot of these things are available. Everything I've talked about in this program is available on DVD and available through the CW Mars Library system as well. So
excellent. No, you're welcome. We're glad that you enjoyed it.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for coming out. This is part of the summer reading program, Tales and Tales. I wanted to do a program about really big tales. So this was one with big tales that are knocking cars over and smashing buildings down. And we all have the things we love. We all have our aesthetic preferences. And mine tends to be a great big giant building, or a great big roaring monster, or probably something really huge that blasts out fire. I'm just that kind of guy.
You got a question about when is the encore?
When is the encore? Oh, I would love to do it. There's some more things that there's lots of other things out there. Lots of other things are going on, and it would be wonderful to do a program that looked at some of Ray Harryhausen's movies. You know, I would like to spend a little more time talking about some of that. How stop motion, how he did some of the things that he did is really great. The technology behind this is just exploding. You know, and now that a lot of it's done with CGI, but I would like to take a moment and point out that writers like Tim Burton with Nightmare Before Christmas have returned to stop motion. In fact, it took, that long in some respects for someone to have the patience to go back and to redo that. And there's some spectacular animated movies. The Box Trolls, I particularly recommend is an example of a stop motion movie.
Wallace and Gromit and Chicken.
Wallace and Gromit, absolutely.
Chicken
so
Run,
they are.
Very definitely
so stop motion
movies
as well has made something of a comeback over the last couple of years.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I'm going to find the button to stop the recording. And
thanks again. Thank you so much for coming out.